The first plasma bolt split the morning sky like a crimson scar, and Zara knew they were all going to die. She pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the Kethvar dreadnought hang in Lyra Prime's atmosphere like a metal predator. The ship's hull gleamed black against the purple dawn, bristling with weapons that could level cities. Behind it, 3 more vessels descended through the cloud layer, their engine trails painting deadly streaks across the horizon. "How many?" she whispered to Commander Thex, the Veltari officer whose blue-scaled hands trembled as he gripped the railing. 4 dreadnoughts, maybe 60 smaller craft. His voice carried the weight of absolute defeat. "They've been hunting us for months. We should have kept running." Zara's hearts, both of them, hammered against her ribcage. The Kethvar Empire didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They consumed worlds like locusts, stripping them of resources and leaving only ash. Lyra Prime had been their sanctuary, a hidden colony where refugees from a dozen species had tried to build something beautiful. Now it would become their tomb. The settlement sprawled below them, a patchwork of different architectural styles reflecting its diverse population. Veltari crystal spires rose beside human-designed prefab modules, while Zenth burrow homes dotted the hillsides like colorful mushrooms. Children from 6 different species had played in those streets just hours ago. Now emergency sirens wailed as families huddled in inadequate shelters, waiting for the end. The defense grid. Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. 3 orbital platforms, civilian-grade shields. We might hold them off for 20 minutes if we're lucky. Thex's translator implant struggled to convey the despair in his native tongue. "I sent a distress signal, but we're in the outer reach. No one patrols this far from civilized space." Another plasma bolt struck the northern sector, vaporizing an entire city block in a flash of superheated light. The shockwave rattled the observation deck's windows, and somewhere in the distance, someone screamed. Zara closed her eyes and remembered her daughter Kaya, safe in the deep shelters with the other younglings. The 8-year-old hybrid had never known war, had grown up believing the universe was a place where different species could live in harmony. Today, that innocence would die. "There has to be something," Zara said. "Some defense we haven't considered." Against the Kethvar. Thex's laugh held no humor. "They've conquered 70 systems in the past decade. Their ships are more advanced than anything in this sector. We have mining equipment and good intentions." The communication array crackled to life, filling the observation deck with a voice like grinding stone. The words came in Kethvar battle cant, but Zara's universal translator rendered them in cold, clinical terms. "Inhabitants of Lyra Prime. You harbor enemies of the Empire. Surrender them within 1 standard hour, or face complete annihilation. This is your only warning." Thex straightened, his officer training overriding his fear. "They want the Terran refugees, the humans who escaped Earth's destruction." Zara's stomach dropped. The 43 human survivors living in the Eastern District were all that remained of their species, scattered remnants of a civilization that had fought the Kethvar to a standstill before their homeworld burned. The Empire's hatred for humanity ran deeper than mere conquest. It was personal. "We won't hand them over," she said. "Then we all die." Thex activated the colony-wide comm system, his voice echoing across the settlement. "All civilians to deep shelters. Emergency protocols are now in effect. This is not a drill." The words felt hollow. Their shelters could protect against meteor strikes and solar flares, not military-grade plasma bombardment. They were buying time they couldn't afford, clinging to hope that didn't exist. Zara thought of the humans she'd come to know. Dr. Martinez, who'd saved her son from fever sickness. Sarah Chen, who taught their children about Earth's lost oceans. Old Jonas, who still carried photos of forests that no longer existed. They'd integrated so completely into their community that she sometimes forgot they were refugees at all. Status report. Thex demanded as tactical displays flickered to life around them. Defensive platforms online, came the reply from their makeshift command center. Shields at maximum. We're tracking multiple incoming fighter craft. The first wave of Kethvar interceptors screamed through the atmosphere, their angular forms cutting through the morning air like knives. They moved with predatory grace, testing the colony's defenses with precision strikes that spoke of overwhelming confidence. One of the orbital platforms returned fire, its energy beams lancing upward in brilliant blue streaks. The shots connected with a Kethvar fighter, but the vessel's shields absorbed the impact without visible damage. The disparity in technology was crushing. "Sir," a young Veltari technician called from the sensor station. "I'm reading massive energy buildup from the lead dreadnought. They're charging their primary weapons." Zara gripped the railing until her knuckles went white. In minutes, maybe less, the bombardment would begin in earnest. The colony would become a crater, and everyone she loved would be vapor. But as she watched the death ships maneuvering in Lyra Prime's sky, something stirred in the corner of her vision. A flicker on the long-range sensors, so faint she almost missed it. "Thex," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at grid 77 Alpha." The sensor ghost hung at the edge of their detection range like a whisper of hope, almost lost in the static of deep space. Commander Thex squinted at the display, his scaled features creased with concentration. "Could be an asteroid," he said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Or sensor malfunction. The Kethvar jamming is playing havoc with our arrays." Zara leaned closer, studying the faint energy signature. It pulsed with an odd rhythm, too regular for natural phenomenon, too subtle for debris. "No, that's a ship. Impossible. Nothing's come through this system in months." Thex enhanced the display, but the contact remained maddeningly vague. Even if it is a vessel, what could one ship do against a Kethvar battle fleet? Another plasma bombardment lit the sky, this time targeting the industrial district. Massive fusion reactors exploded in sequence, turning the night bright as day. The shock wave knocked several people off their feet, and the deck plating groaned under the stress. "Shields down to 60%, reported the technician, his voice tight with fear. "That blast took out Generator 3. We're losing power across the eastern grid." Zara kept her eyes fixed on the mysterious contact. It was moving now, accelerating toward the inner system with purpose that spoke of intelligence. Not drifting like debris or following a natural trajectory. Someone was piloting that ship. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. Thex ran quick calculations. "At current velocity, maybe 40 minutes. But it doesn't matter. The Kethvar will finish us long before." His words died as new contacts blazed to life on the tactical display. The lead dreadnought was launching a full assault wave, 30 fighters, 10 heavy bombers, all vectoring toward the colony's defense platforms. It was over. The battle unfolded with terrible beauty. Streams of plasma fire crisscrossed the sky like deadly aurora, while defensive turrets spat their defiant responses into the darkness. One by one, Lyra Prime's orbital platforms died, their explosions briefly outshining the local star. In the underground shelters, families held each other and waited. Zara could feel their terror through the deck plating, a collective anguish that made her chest ache. Children cried for parents who might not survive the next few minutes. Elders whispered final prayers in languages from a dozen worlds. "Sir," the technician's shout cut through the chaos. "The contact, it's definitely a ship. I'm reading active targeting systems and—" "Wait." His voice dropped to amazement. "Those aren't standard signatures. This is military hardware, but the design patterns." "What?" Thex demanded. "I think it's human." The words hit the command center like a physical blow. Every eye turned to the sensor display, where the contact had resolved into something more substantial. It was still too distant for visual confirmation, but the energy patterns were unmistakable. "That's impossible," Thex breathed. Earth was destroyed. The human fleet was scattered. There are no human warships left. Tell that to whoever's flying that thing, Zara said, her voice tight with desperate hope. The mysterious vessel was accelerating hard now, pushing velocities that should have been impossible for anything smaller than a dreadnought. But this ship moved with the agility of a fighter and the power signature of something much larger. It defied classification. Another orbital platform died in a flower of nuclear fire, leaving only one defensive position between the Kethvar and the colony. The bombardment was already beginning to target surface installations, power plants, communication arrays, anything that might support organized resistance. Estimated time to colony bombardment? Thex asked, though he clearly dreaded the answer. 15 minutes, sir. They're taking their time, picking off our defenses piece by piece. The human ship, if that's what it truly was, continued its impossible approach. Zara found herself holding her breath, counting heartbeats, like a prayer. Whoever was aboard that vessel was flying straight into a battle they couldn't possibly win. One ship against an entire battle fleet was suicide. Unless they had something the Kethvar didn't expect. Are we receiving any communications from the contact? She asked. Nothing on standard frequencies. Wait. The technician adjusted his instruments, filtering through layers of interference. There's something on the old Terran emergency band. Very faint. Put it through. Static filled the command center, punctuated by ghostly whispers that might have been words. The transmission was badly degraded, but underneath the interference, Zara caught fragments of something that made her heart skip. This is Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the Terran defense vessel Defiance. Any one copy. The transmission cut off, lost in the electronic chaos of the battle raging overhead. But those few words were enough to transform the entire atmosphere of the command center. A human voice. A human name. A human ship. Terran defense vessel. Thex repeated, his translator struggling with the unfamiliar designation. I thought their military was destroyed at Earth. Apparently not all of it, Zara whispered. The last orbital platform exploded in a cascade of sparks and twisted metal, leaving Lyra Prime defenseless. The Kethvar fleet began forming bombardment formation, their dreadnoughts positioning themselves for maximum destructive efficiency. In minutes, they would begin the systematic annihilation of everything below. But now there was something else in the sky. A lone ship burning through space like a falling star, carrying with it the impossible hope that someone, somewhere, still remembered what it meant to fight for the innocent. The Defiance was coming, and with it, the ghost of a species that refused to die. Captain Sarah Rodriguez pressed her scared hands against the Defiance's command console and watched the Kethvar fleet through eyes that had seen too much death. 4 dreadnoughts, 60 escort craft, enough firepower to glass a planet. The tactical display painted her odds in unforgiving red, survival probability less than 2%. She'd seen those numbers before. Ma'am, called Lieutenant Morrison from the sensor station, his young face pale with exhaustion. The colony's last defense platform just went dark. Kethvar fleet is moving to bombardment formation. Sarah nodded grimly. Around her, the Defiance's bridge hummed with barely contained energy. The ship was a patchwork miracle, components salvaged from a dozen wrecks, systems jury-rigged beyond their design parameters, hull plates welded over scars that told stories of desperate battles across half the galaxy. She was ugly, temperamental, and absolutely lethal. Time to intercept. 12 minutes at current burn. But Captain, they'll detect us long before. They already know we're here. Sarah's voice carried the weight of 20 years fighting the Empire. Kethvar sensors are too good to miss our approach. They're just not worried about one ship. She turned to face her crew, 14 souls who'd followed her across the void, the last remnant of humanity's military might. They were tired, damaged, held together by duty and stubborn pride. But in their eyes, she saw something that the Kethvar had never understood: the refusal to quit. "Listen up," she said, her voice cutting through the bridge noise. "Down there are 43 human civilians and maybe 50,000 aliens who've never done anything worse than try to build a life for themselves. The Empire wants to murder them all because they gave our people shelter." The tactical display showed the Kethvar fleet spreading into perfect killing formation, their weapons charging for maximum devastation. Standard doctrine: obliterate everything. Sort through the debris later. "We can't win this fight," Sarah continued. "Not in any conventional sense, but we can hurt them. We can make them pay for every civilian they've marked for death. And maybe, just maybe, we can save some lives." Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled over the comm from deep in the ship's bowels. "Captain, the quantum disruptor is online. One shot only. The containment matrix won't survive a second discharge." Sarah smiled grimly. The quantum disruptor was their secret weapon, a piece of experimental technology salvaged from Earth's ruins. Theoretically, it could punch through any known shielding system. Theoretically, it wouldn't tear the Defiance apart when fired. They'd never had a chance to test it. "Target the lead dreadnought," she ordered. "We go in fast and hard. Hit them before they can react properly." "Ma'am," Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "Even if we take out their flagship, the other three will." "Will hesitate," Sarah finished. "The Kethvar worship strength and despise weakness. When we destroy their most powerful ship, they'll second-guess everything. That confusion might buy the colony enough time to evacuate their people." It was a long shot wrapped in wishful thinking, but it was all they had. The Defiance shuddered as her engines pushed beyond safety limits, racing toward a battle that would almost certainly end in their destruction. Through the viewports, Lara Prime grew larger, its surface scarred by bombardment craters. The colony's lights still twinkled in the darkness, homes and schools and hospitals full of beings who trusted the universe to be kind. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Incoming transmission from the Kethvar flagship," reported communications specialist Yates. "Let's hear what they have to say." The voice that filled the bridge was cold and mechanical, translated from the Empire's sibilant language into emotionless standard. "Human vessel. You will reverse course and withdraw from this system. Your species no longer has the right to interfere in Imperial business." Sarah keyed the response channel, her words carrying across space to the alien fleet. "This is Captain Sarah Rodriguez of the Terran defense vessel Defiance. You are attacking innocent civilians under our protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came back laced with what might have been amusement. "Captain Rodriguez. The Empire remembers that name. You were at the Battle of Proxima Station, at the Siege of New Geneva, at Earth's final defense." Sarah's jaw tightened. Every battle mentioned was a defeat, a desperate last stand against impossible odds. The Empire was taunting her with her failures. "We defeated you at every encounter," the voice continued. "Your homeworld burns. Your fleets are scattered. What can one damaged ship accomplish that entire armadas could not?" "Let's find out," Sarah whispered, cutting the channel. The Defiance screamed through space, her hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction as she dove toward the Kethvar fleet. Proximity alarms wailed, targeting systems locked onto the enemy flagship, and the quantum disruptor built toward critical discharge. Around them, space erupted into violence. The Kethvar escorts turned to engage, their plasma cannons painting the void with deadly light. The Defiance's point defense systems came online, intercepting incoming fire with streams of accelerated particles that turned enemy shots into harmless sparkles. "Distance to target?" Sarah asked, her hands flying over the weapon controls. 15,000 kilometers and closing. Quantum disruptor charged to 80%. The lead dreadnought was turning to face them now, its massive bulk rotating with ponderous grace. Gun ports opened along its hull like dying stars, preparing to unleash devastation that could crack moons. 90% charge, Morrison reported. But Captain, if we get much closer. Hold steady, Sarah commanded. We only get one shot. It has to count. The enemy flagship's main batteries opened fire, and space around the Defiance became a storm of superheated plasma. The ship bucked and rolled, her shields flaring brilliant white as they absorbed punishment that should have vaporized her instantly. Shields down to 40%. Someone shouted over the chaos. Quantum disruptor at 100%. Morrison reported. Target locked. Sarah's finger hovered over the firing control, waiting for the perfect moment. The Kethvar dreadnought filled their viewports now, its hull scarred with the victories of 100 conquests. This was the ship that had led the assault on Earth, that had turned humanity's birth world into radioactive slag. Time for payback. Fire. The quantum disruptor unleashed hell in a beam of twisted space-time that made reality scream. The exotic energy tore through the Kethvar flagship's shields like tissue paper, punching deep into the massive vessel's armored hull. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then the dreadnought's entire forward section simply ceased to exist, matter unraveling at the quantum level. Captain Rodriguez felt the Defiance shudder as the weapon's recoil nearly tore her ship apart. Containment fields failed across 3 decks, artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, and half the bridge displays went dark. But they were still alive, still fighting, and the enemy flagship was dying. Direct hit. Morrison shouted over the chaos. The dreadnoughts breaking apart. Through the main viewport, Sarah watched the Kethvar Pride spiral out of control, its rear section separating from the vaporized bow in a shower of debris and atmosphere. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull as internal systems overloaded, and escape pods began jettisoning from the doomed vessel like fleeing insects. The destruction of their flagship sent shockwaves through the Kethvar fleet. The remaining 3 dreadnoughts had stopped their bombardment approach, their formations wavering as commanders struggled to process what they'd just witnessed. A single human ship had killed their most powerful vessel with a weapon they'd never seen before. All enemy vessels are changing course, reported Tactical Officer Hayes from her station. They're regrouping. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. The Kethvar might be ruthless, but they weren't stupid. They'd suddenly realized this wasn't the easy massacre they'd expected. Now they would reassess, regroup, and come at the Defiance with everything they had. "Ma'am," Morrison called from sensors. "I'm reading massive energy spikes from all 3 remaining dreadnoughts. They're charging every weapon system simultaneously." The brief reprieve was over. In moments, the entire Kethvar fleet would focus their combined firepower on the Defiance, and no amount of maneuvering would save them from that kind of concentrated assault. "Chief Patel," Sarah called over the comm. "Status on our quantum disruptor." The chief engineer's voice came back strained and exhausted. "Completely fried, Captain. The containment matrix melted, the focusing array is slag, and we've got hull breaches on 5 decks. We're lucky the whole ship didn't implode. So much for their secret weapon." Now they were back to conventional armaments against 3 dreadnoughts that knew exactly how dangerous they could be. "Captain," Yates called from communications. "I'm receiving a transmission from the colony. Audio only." Sarah nodded. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was female, speaking accented standard with the careful precision of a universal translator. "This is Colony Administrator Zara Chenvos to the human warship. Captain Rodriguez, is that really you?" For a moment, Sarah was transported back 20 years to a diplomatic reception on Earth. A young Veltari trade delegate with kind eyes and an infectious laugh. One of the few aliens who tried to understand human culture before the war began. "Hello, Zara," Sarah said softly. "It's been a long time. Too long, and under terrible circumstances." There was pain in Zara's voice, but also fierce determination. "Captain, you need to know. We won't let you sacrifice yourself for us. The humans in this colony are already moving to the surface. If the Kethvar want them, they'll have to come down and take them. Sarah's jaw tightened. The refugees were making themselves targets, drawing the enemy away from the civilian shelters. It was brave and stupid and completely human. Zara, get them back underground. We can handle. No. The word carried absolute finality. My people gave your species shelter when Earth fell. Your Dr. Martinez saved my son's life. Sarah Chen taught our children about your lost oceans. We won't hide while you die for us. On the tactical display, the Kethvar fleet had finished regrouping. 3 dreadnoughts and their escort wings were moving into attack formation, weapons hot and targeting systems locked onto the Defiance. In minutes, they would open fire with enough concentrated energy to sterilize a continent. Captain, Morrison said quietly, if we're going to run, now would be the time. Sarah looked around her bridge at faces she'd come to know better than family. Morrison, barely 25 and already a veteran of a dozen impossible battles. Hayes, who'd lost her entire family at New Geneva, but never lost her fighting spirit. Yates, who could jury-rig a communications array from spare parts and determination. They were tired. They were outnumbered. They were probably going to die. They were also exactly where they chose to be. Set course for the second dreadnought, Sarah ordered. All weapons online. If we're going down, we're taking as many of these bastards with us as possible. The Defiance turned toward the enemy fleet like a fighter accepting a challenge. Her battered hull gleamed in the light of Lyra Prime's star, every scar and patch a testament to her crew's refusal to surrender. She was the last warship of a dead civilization, crewed by the ghosts of a murdered world. But she was still human, still fighting, still refusing to quit. The Kethvar opened fire first, their massed plasma batteries turning space into a storm of deadly energy. The Defiance dove through the barrage like a dancer, her pilot's desperate skill keeping them alive for precious seconds longer than should have been possible. Return fire, Sarah commanded. The Defiance's weapons, conventional missiles, plasma cannons, railguns that fired slugs at near light speed, lashed out at the enemy formation. Their shots were pinpricks compared to the quantum disruptor, but they found their marks with the precision of a crew that had learned to make every shot count. A Kethvar cruiser staggered as railgun slugs punched through its armor, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. An escort frigate vanished in nuclear fire as a missile found its reactor core. The Defiance was dying, but she was taking enemies with her. Shields down to 15%, Hayes reported. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We're venting atmosphere. Sarah felt the ship shudder under enemy fire, felt the deck plating buckle beneath her feet. Through the bridge's cracked viewports, she could see Lyra Prime hanging in space like a jewel, its cities still twinkling in the darkness. Those lights represented hope. They represented the possibility that different species could coexist, that the universe might contain something other than endless war. The Kethvar wanted to extinguish those lights forever. Not while Sarah Rodriguez still drew breath. All power to forward shields, she ordered, ramming speed. An escort frigate vanished in nuclear fire as a missile found its reactor core. The Defiance was dying, but she was taking enemies with her. Shields down to 15%, Hayes reported. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We're venting atmosphere. Sarah felt the ship shudder under enemy fire, felt the deck plating buckle beneath her feet. Through the bridge's cracked viewports, she could see Lyra Prime hanging in space like a jewel, its cities still twinkling in the darkness. Those lights represented hope. They represented the possibility that different species could coexist, that the universe might contain something other than endless war. The Kethvar wanted to extinguish those lights forever. Not while Sarah Rodriguez still drew breath. All power to forward shields, she ordered, ramming speed. The Defiance screamed toward the second Kethvar dreadnought like a comet seeking its own destruction. Her engines pushed far beyond safe operating parameters. In her wake, the first dreadnought continued its death spiral internal explosions lighting up its hull like a twisted constellation. "Captain, are you insane?" Chief Patel's voice crackled over the intercom from engineering. "The structural integrity field can't handle this acceleration. We're going to shake ourselves apart." Sarah's hands flew over the helm controls, making micro-adjustments that kept them threading through the enemy's defensive fire. A plasma bolt passed so close to the bridge that the radiation alarms screamed, but somehow they stayed intact. "How long until impact?" she asked. 40 seconds at current velocity," Morrison reported, his voice tight with concentration. "But Captain, their point defense systems are coming online. They're going to tear us apart before we can reach them." The Kethvar dreadnought was rotating to bring its main batteries to bear, its massive bulk moving with surprising grace for something the size of a small city. Gun ports opened along its flanks like predatory eyes, and Sarah could see the energy buildup that meant death for her ship and crew. "Evasive maneuvers," she ordered, throwing the Defiance into a spiraling dive that pushed the inertial compensators to their limits. Around them, space erupted with plasma fire that turned the void into a deadly light show. Through the chaos, Sarah caught glimpses of Lyra Prime's surface. She could see the colony's lights still burning, defiant against the darkness. Somewhere down there, human refugees and alien families huddled together, united by their shared mortality and their shared hope. The Kethvar had made a fundamental mistake. They thought this was about conquest, about adding another world to their empire. They didn't understand that some things were worth dying for. 20 seconds to impact," Morrison called. "Their defensive fire is intensifying." A plasma burst caught the Defiance's port side, sending her tumbling end over end. Sparks showered from overloaded circuits, and the artificial gravity failed for terrifying seconds that left everyone floating in their restraints. Emergency lighting cast the bridge in hellish red shadows. "Structural integrity down to 30%, someone shouted over the alarms. "We're losing hull plating." Sarah fought to regain control, her pilot's instincts honed by 20 years of impossible battles. The ship responded sluggishly, damaged systems protesting every command, but she was still flying, still fighting. 10 seconds, Morrison announced. "Point defense systems are locking on." The Kethvar dreadnought's close-in weapons opened fire, filling space around the Defiance with streams of accelerated particles designed to shred incoming missiles. But Captain Rodriguez had been flying combat missions since before some of these gunners were born, and she knew tricks that predated their tactical databases. She cut power to the engines and let momentum carry them forward, the Defiance suddenly invisible to sensors calibrated for active propulsion signatures. For crucial seconds, the enemy gunners lost their lock, their weapons firing at empty space while the human ship ghosted through their defensive screen. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The Defiance struck the Kethvar dreadnought amidships with the force of a small asteroid, her reinforced prow punching through armor plating that could withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. The collision drove her deep into the enemy vessel's hull, crushing bulkheads and venting atmosphere in massive geysers. But Sarah had planned for more than just a ramming attack. As the two ships ground together in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, she activated the Defiance's self-destruct sequence. "All hands, abandon ship," she broadcasted over the general comm. "This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately." Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency born of too many emergencies. Morrison grabbed the tactical data cores, while Hayes initiated the escape pod launch sequence. Chief Patel's voice echoed from engineering as he sealed the reactor compartments to prevent radiation leaks. But even as her crew prepared to abandon ship, Sarah remained at her station. Someone had to guide the Defiance's final moments, to ensure their sacrifice would count for something. Through the shattered viewports, she could see deep into the Kethvar ship's interior. Alien crew members in environmental suits were fighting fires and sealing hull breaches, trying desperately to save their vessel. She felt a moment of sympathy for them. They were soldiers following orders, just as she was. The difference was what those orders meant. "Captain," Morrison called from the escape pod airlock. "We need to go now." Sarah looked at the self-destruct countdown. 30 seconds and falling. Around her, the bridge was coming apart as the two ships continued their deadly embrace. Sparks rained from severed cables, and the deck plating groaned under stresses it was never designed to handle. "Go," she told her crew. "That's an order." "Sarah, go." She heard the escape pod launch, carrying her people away from the destruction to come. For a moment, the bridge was silent except for the countdown timer and the distant sound of rending metal. 20 seconds. Through the chaos, a new voice crackled over the emergency channel. Commander Thex, broadcasting from the colony. "Captain Rodriguez, your crew's escape pod is being tracked by HFY fighters. They're not going to make it to the surface." Sarah's jaw tightened. Even in death, the Empire would show no mercy. Her people would die in the void, just another casualty of a war that should have ended with Earth's destruction. Unless. With 10 seconds left on the countdown, Sarah made a choice that would have surprised no one who'd served with her. She canceled the self-destruct and powered up the Defiance's remaining weapon systems. The ship was dying, her hull breached in a dozen places, her engines dead and her shields gone. But her guns still worked, and Captain Sarah Rodriguez still had one last fight in her. She targeted the fighters pursuing her crew's escape pod and opened fire. The Defiance's final barrage lit up space like a dying star's last breath. Her remaining weapons, 3 plasma cannons and a damaged missile launcher, spat defiance at the HFY fighters pursuing her crew. The shots were wild, unguided, fired from a ship that was more wrecked than Warship, but they found their marks with the precision that comes from absolute desperation. 2 fighters vanished in balls of nuclear fire. A third spun away, trailing atmosphere and debris. The escape pod carrying Morrison and the others suddenly had a clear path to Lyra Prime's surface. Captain Sarah Rodriguez slumped in her command chair, watching the tactical display fade as the Defiance's power systems finally failed. Around her, the bridge was a tomb of shattered displays and sparking cables. The air tasted of ozone and defeat. But on the planet below, her crew would live. The colony's civilians would have their defenders. It was enough. The HFY dreadnought shuddered around her as its own damage took hold. The Defiance's ramming attack had driven deep into the alien ship's core systems, and secondary explosions were rippling through its hull. Both vessels were dying together, locked in a final embrace that neither would survive. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of Earth, blue skies, and green oceans that existed now only in memory. She thought of her daughter Elena, lost in the homeworld's destruction, and her husband Marcus, who died defending the orbital shipyards. Soon she would see them again. But death, it seemed, had other plans. The explosion that should have consumed her never came. Instead, she heard the distinctive whine of emergency transporters, not human technology, but something older and more sophisticated. The world around her dissolved into streams of coherent energy, and when it reformed, she was lying on a medical bed in an unfamiliar room. Captain Rodriguez. The voice belonged to Commander Thex, the Veltari officer she'd heard over the comm channels. His blue-scaled face showed concern mixed with something that might have been awe. "Please don't try to move. Our medical systems are still learning human physiology." Sarah struggled to sit up, her body protesting every movement. Through a nearby window, she could see Lyra Prime's surface, intact, undamaged, with the colony's lights still burning against the darkness. "The HFY fleet?" she asked. "Gone." Thex's expression mixed satisfaction with lingering disbelief. When their second dreadnought was destroyed, the remaining ships withdrew. "Our sensor arrays tracked them jumping to hyperspace 6 hours ago." 6 hours. Sarah had been unconscious for 6 hours while the galaxy's balance shifted around her. The HFY Empire, for the first time in decades, had been forced to retreat by inferior numbers and obsolete technology. Your crew is safe, Thex continued. Their escape pod made it to the surface with minimal damage. Chief Pottle is already helping our engineers repair the defense grid, and Lieutenant Morrison has been asking about you every 10 minutes since the medical team pulled you from the wreckage. Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. You recovered me from the Defiance? What was left of her? Thex's voice carried deep respect. Both ships were destroyed, but our transporters managed to lock onto your life signs just before the final explosion. It was unprecedented. A ship that size ramming a dreadnought and actually succeeding. Through the medical bay speakers, Sarah could hear the sounds of a colony rebuilding. Construction equipment, voices calling instructions in multiple languages, the steady hum of a civilization refusing to die. It was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The human refugees, she asked. All 43 are safe. When the Kethavar withdrew, they came up from the shelters asking how they could help with repairs. Your Dr. Martinez is treating wounded civilians, and Engineer Chen has been working with our technical teams to strengthen our defensive systems. Thex paused, his expression thoughtful. They say they're not refugees anymore. They say they're home. Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Home. Such a simple word, but one that had seemed impossible since Earth's destruction. The idea that humanity might have found a place where they belonged, where they were wanted rather than merely tolerated, was almost too much to bear. There's something else, Thex said quietly. Word of what happened here is spreading. The story of a single human warship that held off an entire Kethavar fleet. It's reached systems throughout this sector. Other colonies are asking questions. Some are requesting human advisors for their defense planning. Sarah raised an eyebrow. They want military consultants. They want to know how you did it. How one ship with outdated technology and a crew of 14 managed to accomplish what their full battle fleets couldn't. Thex leaned forward, his scaled features intense. Captain, the Kethavar have conquered 70 systems in the past decade. Today was the first time anyone has forced them to retreat. Ever. The implications were staggering. For 20 years, the Empire had seemed unstoppable, an inexorable force that consumed worlds like a plague. But the Defiance had proven they could be beaten, their tactics countered, their seemingly invincible ships destroyed. It wasn't just superior technology, Sarah said slowly. The quantum disruptor helped, but that was only one shot. The real difference was... She paused, trying to articulate something that went beyond tactics or weapon systems. How did you explain the human refusal to accept defeat? The willingness to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. Desperation, she finally said. We had nothing left to lose. When you're already dead, you can take risks that no sane commander would consider. Perhaps, Thex said, but I think it was more than that. I've studied the tactical recordings from our sensors. Your ship moved like it was alive, like it was thinking 3 steps ahead of every enemy action. That's not desperation, that's genius. Before Sarah could respond, the medical bay doors slid open to admit a familiar figure. Morrison rushed in, his young face flushed with relief and exhaustion. Captain, thank God you're awake. The whole colony's been asking about you. There are delegations from 6 different systems requesting meetings, and the Velitary Council wants to offer you a formal commission in their defense forces. Sarah held up a hand, overwhelmed by the flood of information. Slow down, Lieutenant. One thing at a time. Morrison took a deep breath, visibly composing himself. Sorry, ma'am. It's just, everything's changed. The Kethavar withdrawal has created a power vacuum in this sector. Systems that were too afraid to resist before are suddenly talking about mutual defense pacts. They want human leadership. The irony was almost too much to bear. 20 years ago, humanity had been the galaxy's pariahs, the aggressive upstarts who dared to challenge the established order. Now, in the aftermath of Earth's destruction, they were being hailed as liberators. "What about the survivors?" Sarah asked. "The other scattered human ships." "That's the best part," Morrison said, his voice excited. Colony Administrator Zara has been broadcasting the story of the Defiance across every communication network she can access. 3 human vessels have already responded: the cruiser Indomitable, the destroyer Relentless, and a supply ship called the New Dawn. They're all en route to Lyra Prime. Sarah felt her heart skip. 3 ships. Combined with whatever they could salvage from the Defiance, it wasn't much of a fleet, but it was a beginning. A foundation on which to rebuild. "There's more," Thex interjected. "The Zenth Collective has offered to provide shipyard facilities for refitting your vessels. The Altarian Republic wants to discuss technology sharing agreements. Even the Centauri Federation, who have been strictly neutral for decades, has sent diplomatic inquiries." The scope of what was happening began to sink in. The Defiance's sacrifice hadn't just saved one colony, it had sparked something larger. A coalition of species who'd finally found the courage to stand up to the Kethvar Empire. "Captain," Morrison said quietly, "they want you to lead it. The coalition, I mean. Admiral Zara Chen Voss, she was promoted by emergency vote of the participating systems, has formally requested that you accept command of the Allied fleet." Admiral Zara. Sarah smiled at that. The young trade delegate she'd met at a diplomatic reception 20 years ago had become a leader in her own right. Someone capable of uniting diverse species behind a common cause. "And if I refuse?" Sarah asked. Thex and Morrison exchanged glances. "Then we keep fighting without you," Thex said simply. "The Kethvar think they've only faced one exceptional human ship. They don't realize that exceptional is what your species calls normal." Sarah looked out the window again, watching as humans and aliens worked together to repair the damage from the battle. Children played in the streets while their parents rebuilt homes and businesses. It was a scene of hope made manifest, proof that the universe could contain something more than endless war. But she also knew the Kethvar would return. The Empire didn't accept defeat gracefully, and their pride would demand vengeance for the destruction of 2 dreadnoughts. Next time, they would come with overwhelming force, determined to make examples of everyone who dared to resist. Unless someone stopped them first. "How long until the other human ships arrive?" she asked. "The Indomitable should be here within the week," Morrison reported. "Captain Zhang sent word that she's bringing technical specifications for improved shielding systems. The New Dawn is carrying refugee families from the outer colonies. Another 200 humans looking for a place to call home. 200 more. It was a tiny number compared to the billions who died when Earth burned, but it represented something precious: continuity. The human story would continue, carried forward by people who refused to let their civilization vanish into history. "All right," Sarah said, pushing herself upright despite the medical equipment's protests. "Let's go meet our new allies. But first, I want to see what's left of the Defiance." Thex looked concerned. "Captain, the ship was completely destroyed. There's nothing left but debris." "Then we'll honor the debris," Sarah said firmly. "That ship and her crew changed the course of galactic history. The least we can do is remember her properly." As they made their way through the colony's corridors, Sarah was struck by the energy surrounding her. Everywhere she looked, beings from dozens of species were working together with a purpose she hadn't seen since the early days of Earth's expansion into space. They were building something new, not just repairing the damage from one battle, but laying the foundation for a different kind of future. The Defiance was gone, her noble sacrifice written in fire across the void. But her legacy lived on in the hope of those who'd witnessed her final stand, in the courage of species who'd learned that even the mighty could fall. Captain Sarah Rodriguez, the last defender of a dead world, had become something new, the first guardian of a living coalition. And in the depths of space, other human ships were coming home at last, ready to take their place in the galaxy's next chapter. The war against the Kethvar Empire was far from over. But for the first time in 20 years, it was a war that could be won.